So, what if the absolute worst thing you could possibly do for your life's work is to basically make yourself perfectly indispensable to it?
Which is, a terrifying thought for most people.
Right. I mean, think about that for just a second. We're completely, totally conditioned to believe that success means being the linchpin. You want to be that one person the company absolutely cannot survive without.
Exactly. You want the job secured.
Yeah, you want to be the parent who hovers over every single decision, or you want to be the founder whose name is literally synonymous with the brand. But what if that exact instinct, that desire to be the absolute center of gravity, is actually this catastrophic structural weakness?
Yeah, it's a radical shift in perspective. And frankly, it is deeply unsettling if you have spent your entire life, operating under the standard corporate or cultural blueprints for achievement. Because those blueprints tell you to hoard control.
They really do. And that's because those standard blueprints are essentially they're instructions for building a massive sandcastle on a really crowded beach.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Because the goal we are handed is immediate visibility. You're told to build the tallest towers, construct the widest walls, gather the biggest crowd of onlookers to admire your work right now, today.
You want the engagement.
Exactly. You want the likes, you want the quarterly earnings to reflect your immediate genius. But the tragic reality of a sandcastle is that the tide is always, inevitably, coming in.
Yeah, it always washes away.
Always. And no matter how spectacular that structure was, no matter how many people stopped to take pictures of it, the water eventually levels it because it was built entirely for the afternoon. It was never engineered to actually survive the ecosystem.
And that's the perfect way to visualize what the source text we are examining today calls a terminal vision.
A terminal vision.
Yeah, a monument to a single afternoon. It requires your constant presence and your constant maintenance, and the very second you step away, it just begins to disintegrate.
And that tension right there, that is the entire mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring a really profound, incredibly comprehensive source document titled The Mission That Outlives You.
It's such a heavy title.
It is, but it's so fitting. It is this incredibly rich exploration of legacy, discipleship, and Christian leadership that just completely challenges, honestly, it dismantles our modern obsession with visibility and speed and scale.
It really pulls no punches.
None at all. It asks this central, deeply uncomfortable question. What if the truest measure of a life is not what it accumulates, but what it transmits?
And that question alone, it is enough to disrupt almost everything we are taught in modern business schools or like weekend leadership seminars.
Oh, absolutely.
Because this source material takes those typical corporate metrics of success, the follower counts,
Right.
the rapid asset accumulation, the massive expansion, and it exposes them as inherently fragile. And it replaces them with what the author describes as an agricultural logic.
Yeah.
It shifts the entire paradigm completely away from factories and machines and infinite growth loops and redirects it towards seeds, soil, and succession.
Which is so much slower.
It is agonizingly slow.
Yeah.
But it demands a total reorientation of how we actually measure the value of a lifetime.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is custom tailored for you listening right now. I mean, whether you are leading a team at a crazy, fast-paced tech startup or managing a massive corporate division, or whether you are raising a family, or honestly, whether you are just sitting in traffic right now trying to figure out what kind of actual enduring legacy you are going to leave behind when your career or your life is over.
Because we all wrestle with that. We all want to matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because we are trained, literally neurologically conditioned by algorithms and our culture to celebrate what dazzles in the moment. We desperately want that instant dopamine hit of visible success.
Right. We want the applause now.
We do. But this text forcefully redirects our gaze to what survives across generations. So, to understand how to build a mission that actually outlives you, we first have to understand why our current definitions of success are, well, fundamentally broken, at least according to the logic presented in this text.
And they are fundamentally broken because they are entirely focused on possession and containment.
Okay, what do you mean by containment?
Well, the modern imagination defines success as having more,
Hmm.
right? More influence, more assets, more recognition, and ultimately more control. You contain the power.
I see.
And even in sectors like nonprofit work or community organizing or even religious ministry, these corporate metrics quietly colonize the human heart. It's insidious. People start instinctively asking, are we growing in numbers? Or are our revenues up?
Right, checking the spreadsheets.
Exactly. Instead asking the far more difficult, messy questions like, Are we actually forming resilient human character? Or are we making deep disciples who can function without us?
Which is a terrifying question for a leader to ask.
It is. And the text heavily contrasts this modern default with what it calls the logic of the kingdom. The kingdom of God, as presented in the biblical narrative, does not advance like a spotlight sweeping across a stage. It advances like a seed.
And let's be honest, a seed is deeply, deeply unimpressive.
It's basically invisible.
Yeah, if I hand you a single seed, you aren't going to be awestruck. When you drop it in the dirt, it disappears entirely. It's tiny, it's vulnerable, and it is incredibly easy to just overlook or dismiss.
Exactly. It completely lacks the immediate grandeur of the sandcastle you mentioned earlier. But, and this is the crucial part, encoded within that tiny, unimpressive seed is an entire self-replicating future.
Right. It has the DNA for a whole forest in it.
Yes. And the text points out this fascinating dichotomy.
Hmm.
The world rewards founders. A founder is someone who builds something in order to own it, right? To
Yeah.
control it, to monetize it, and to have their name stamped on the side of the building in big letters.
We totally idolize founders in our culture. Look at Silicon Valley.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the kingdom logic honors fathers and mothers. These are people who operate with an entirely different psychological drive.
How so?
Well, they build what they know they may never fully enjoy. They bless, and they empower what they know they may never fully control.
Man, that is a massive psychological shift. Moving your identity from a founder to a father or a mother.
It changes everything about how you make decisions.
It really does. Because a founder is threatened when someone else on the team has a better idea, right? Because it challenges their supremacy, their ownership of the genius. But a father or mother is thrilled when their child outgrows them or achieves something greater than they did, because that was the entire point of the investment.
What's fascinating here is the theological argument the text makes to back this up. It points out that God inherently thinks in generations. He is almost never introduced in Scripture merely as the God of an isolated standalone individual.
Right, it's always a lineage.
Exactly. The recurring refrain is that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His strategy stretches far, far beyond the horizon of one human lifetime.
Which is hard for us to grasp because we barely think past the next fiscal quarter.
Right. But if you look at the major biblical figures, the pattern is unmistakable. Like, Abraham received this monumental promise that he never saw fully fulfilled. He lived out his days in a literal tent, in a land that was promised to his descendants, not to his own immediate possession.
He never got the deed to the city.
No. And Moses, he did the agonizing, grueling work of leading a fractured, complaining people through a harsh desert for 40 years. He brought them to the absolute edge of their inheritance, but he never stepped foot inside it himself.
He literally died on the mountain looking at it.
Yes. And David, he spent the twilight of his life gathering and organizing all the raw materials, all the gold and timber, for a glorious temple that he was explicitly forbidden to build.
Which, honestly, if we look at that through our modern lens, that looks like failure, or at least immense heartbreaking frustration.
It looks like they got robbed of the payoff.
Exactly. They were all doing the heavy lifting to prepare for a future they did not get to personally experience or take credit for.
Precisely. And the text uses two very specific, contrasting words to describe this difference in worldview. Terminal versus transitional.
Okay, break those down.
A terminal vision says, let me complete this project, let me display it to the world, and let me own the rights to it. It terminates with the individual. It ends when they end.
Right.
But a transitional vision says, let me obey the calling, let me establish the firm foundation, and let me willingly hand it over to someone else to finish.
Okay, I have to push back on that a little bit just to translate this to the listener's everyday reality.
Sure.
Because a transitional vision sounds incredibly frustrating, almost deeply unfair for a highly ambitious person. Imagine you are running a relay race.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You have spent your whole life waking up at 4 a.m. to train. You have sacrificed your social life. Your diet is perfectly dialed in. You are obsessed with crossing that finish line and hearing the roar of the crowd.
You've put in the blood, sweat, and tears.
Exactly. But the logic of this text is essentially telling you that the only way to actually win this specific race is to perfectly pass the baton to someone else and then willingly step off the track so they can cross the finish line.
And they get the photo finish.
Right. How does the text say we are supposed to overcome the massive amount of human ego required to step off the track like that?
Yeah.
I mean, our entire economy, our whole society runs on ego.
That is the core struggle, isn't it?
Yeah,
The human ego constantly demands visibility and validation.
it's exhausting.
It is. And the text addresses this tension head-on by pointing to a subtle, yet incredibly destructive temptation in leadership, which is the burning desire to be indispensable.
The linchpin.
Exactly. We absolutely love the feeling of being needed. When you are the only one who knows how to fix the legacy server code, or you're the only one who can close the big, difficult client, it gives you a profound illusion of control.
Oh, totally. And it gives you a deep, comforting sense of significance. You feel secure.
But the text warns that this is a complete trap. The more a mission, or a corporate division, or a family system depends heavily on one personality or one founder's manic energy, the more fragile that entire ecosystem becomes.
Because it's a single point of failure.
Exactly. When that founder gets sick or burns out or simply leaves the room to go to the bathroom, the whole structure starts to wobble and collapse.
So, what we perceive as our ultimate strength, being the indispensable hero, is actually a massive structural weakness for the organization itself. By making myself the center, I have literally become the ceiling.
You become the absolute bottleneck for any future growth. And the text provides a radical, almost shocking theological example to illustrate this point.
Okay, what is it?
The physical departure of Jesus.
Wait, really?
Yeah. In the Gospel of John, specifically chapter 16, verse 7, Jesus is sitting with his closest followers, his executive team, basically, and he tells them that it is actually to their advantage that he goes away.
Which, from a sheer organizational leadership perspective, sounds completely insane.
It makes no business sense.
None. You have the ultimate charismatic, completely flawless leader right there in the room with you. He can heal the sick, feed thousands with a sack lunch, outsmart all the critics. And he is looking at his team and saying, you guys are going to be much better off when I resign and leave.
Right.
I just can't imagine a modern CEO ever saying that unless the company was actively failing and they were jumping ship.
It runs completely counter to everything we are taught about consolidating leadership. But Jesus deeply understood the fundamental flaw of indispensability. He knew that his continued physical, localized presence would actually limit the scope of the mission.
Because he was in a human body. He could only be in one town at a time.
Exactly. By remaining geographically bound to one region, he could only be in one place. His departure was not an abandonment. It was a highly strategic launch sequence.
A launch sequence, I like that phrasing.
Yeah, his physical absence is what triggered the deployment of the Spirit, launching the mission into a massive global mandate. He didn't build a massive mega platform to broadcast his own voice forever.
Right, he didn't start a podcast.
No. He invested intensely, deeply, and privately into 12 flawed, messy men, knowing fully well that his own departure was the very mechanism required for exponential multiplication.
It's that relay baton pass again?
Yes, and this is a recurring pattern in the text. Moses could not lead forever. She had to intentionally train Joshua. Elijah had to intentionally pass his mantle to Elisha. True leadership is never about maintaining your iron grip on power. It is about relentlessly preparing your successors to replace you.
So let's bring this down to the ground for the listener again, because in the modern workplace, or even in volunteer organizations or nonprofits, being indispensable literally equals job security.
It is for sure.
We live in an era of massive layoffs and restructuring. It feels incredibly safe to be the only person who understands the donor database or the only person who wields the trust of the keyboard members.
It's leverage.
It is. If I diligently train someone to do exactly what I do and I just freely give away my specialized knowledge, I am making myself replaceable. And in our economy, absolutely nobody wants to be replaceable. It feels like career suicide.
It does feel dangerous. But the text completely redefines that sense of security. It explicitly states, and this is a quote we really need to sit with, your worth is never secured by control.
Wow. Your worth is never secured by control.
Your deepest significance does not come from hoarding influence or building a defensive moat around your expertise. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text offers the cross as the ultimate paradigm for this kind of outlasting fruit.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, think about this. In the world's eyes, the crucifixion was a catastrophic, embarrassing failure. It was the public, humiliating collapse of a highly promising political and spiritual movement. The leader was executed like a criminal, and the followers scattered in terror.
Total PR nightmare.
Exactly. But in God's economy, the logic is totally inverted. Giving away power, relinquishing life itself is not a defeat. It is the necessary seedbed of multiplication.
It's the John 12 concept, right? The grain of wheat.
Yes, John 12.24. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. If that grain of wheat stays on the shelf, perfectly preserved, protected, and fully in control of its own existence, it remains a single, isolated grain forever. It never becomes anything more.
It's safe, but it's sterile.
Exactly. In the kingdom logic, giving away is not losing. Relinquishing control is the absolute prerequisite for resurrection fruitfulness. If a leader cannot release power, if they cannot tolerate someone else getting the credit on a project, they physically cannot participate in this pattern of multiplication.
Okay, so if I actually manage to suppress my ego, if I somehow step off the track and hand over the baton, if I relinquish the microphone, I have a very practical question here.
Go for it.
Where does the real work of history actually happen? Because if it isn't happening on the brightly lit stages, and it isn't happening in the viral moments or the massive product launches we are all constantly staring at on our phones, where is it happening?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because the text makes a very bold claim that the most consequential acts of leadership are actually hidden.
Yes, and this is perhaps one of the most profound and challenging rebukes in the entire document to our modern obsession with public outcomes. The text introduces an incredible concept called generational architecture.
Generational architecture. I love that.
It's brilliant. Generational architecture consists of the foundational acts that no algorithm can ever measure, no social media feed will ever reward, and no quarterly report will ever reflect.
Give me some examples of what that looks like.
It is the unseen sermon delivered to an audience of 2 people in a living room. It is the anonymous act of financial generosity that saves a family from eviction, but never, ever gets a plaque on a wall.
Right.
It is the agonizing late-night prayer for a wandering, rebellious child. It is the careful, private, and often really uncomfortable correction of a young, arrogant leader by a seasoned mentor. The text argues that God routinely plants the seeds of future history in acts of quiet, uncelebrated obedience.
Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Because the text doesn't just present this as some nice abstract theory. It fires off this incredible rapid-fire list of biblical examples that prove this point.
The list is staggering when you look at it together.
It really is. And when you look at these examples, you realize absolutely none of them were front-page news when they happened. Like Jochebed quietly hiding her baby, Moses, in a basket to save him from execution.
Right.
That wasn't a public event. That was a terrified mother making a desperate, hidden choice in the mud of a riverbank. Or Naomi, quietly counseling Ruth in the shadows, orchestrating a redemption story that would eventually lead directly to the lineage of King David.
Totally behind the scenes.
Yeah. Hannah weeping and praying in private for a child, completely misunderstood by the religious leaders of her day. They thought she was drunk. Or Mary saying yes to an angel in a tiny, economically depressed, completely unnoticed village.
Whose buddy saw that happen?
Exactly. Priscilla and Aquila noticing that a young, highly gifted speaker named Apollos was factually incorrect in his theology, and instead of blasting him publicly or canceling him on the ancient equivalent of Twitter, they pull him aside privately into their home to deeply disciple him.
Which takes so much more time and grace.
So much more. And then Timothy, receiving his foundational faith not from a massive, stadium-sized revival meeting, but organically from his mother and grandmother in their living room over years and years of quiet conversation.
Just look at that list. Not a single one of those individuals needed a public stage, a personal brand, or a massive platform to matter. They were not focused on visibility at all. They were entirely engaged in the tedious, vital work of building generational architecture.
It makes me think of building a skyscraper.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, think about walking through downtown Manhattan or Chicago. You look up and you are immediately captivated by the shiny glass reflecting the sun, right? The sleek steel framework, the sheer dizzying height of it, it is dazzling.
You're just craning your neck looking at it.
Yeah. Exactly. But what you absolutely never see is the foundation. You don't see the massive, ugly pit that was dug deep into the dirt. You don't see the thousands of tons of concrete and rusted rebar buried hundreds of feet deep underground.
Stuff that actually holds it up.
Yeah. The foundational phase of a skyscraper is dirty, it's loud, it's unglamorous, and it's largely hidden behind those ugly plywood fences. In fact, for months, it looks like the builders are actually going backwards. They're just digging a deeper hole instead of going up.
Right. The progress looks negative.
Exactly. But if you get impatient and try to build that shiny 100-story glass tower without spending the agonizing time and resources on that hidden architecture, the entire thing shatters and collapses the second the wind blows or the barometric pressure drops.
That is a phenomenal analogy
Yeah.
because it perfectly diagnoses our current cultural sickness.
How so?
The modern world is entirely addicted to building glass facades. We want the platform, we want the personal brand, we want the rapid vertical rise so everybody can see exactly how high we've climbed. We focus almost entirely on the exterior aesthetics.
Right, the optics.
Yeah, the optics. But the text warns that massive events, slick programs, and viral marketing campaigns do not reproduce life. They just gather crowds.
There's a big difference there.
A huge difference. The Great Commission, which is the foundational mandate of Christianity, was not a call to produce massive crowds of passive spiritual consumers. It was an explicit command to make deep, resilient disciples. And discipleship is inherently slow, messy, long-view work.
It's life on life.
Yes, it is not a transaction of data. It is a profound transfer of life. Legacy is not a golden watch you receive at a retirement dinner at the end of a career. Legacy is the concrete and the rebar that has been painstakingly built into the people around you over decades.
And that's good. But the text also makes a really important nuanced pivot here, and I want to make sure we don't miss it.
Let's hear it.
Because this hidden preparation, this deep foundational concrete pouring phase is absolutely vital. We've established that. But God doesn't prepare people just so they can stay comfortably hidden in the basement forever.
Right. You don't build a massive concrete foundation just to leave an empty dirt lot.
Exactly. Eventually, that hidden preparation has to give way to public action. There is a necessary transition point.
Yes, and the text defines this phase as the sacred tension between preparation and deployment.
The sacred tension.
Yeah, and this is a critical psychological hurdle for people. There comes a definitive point in every serious calling when the preparation stops feeling like a theoretical, safe classroom exercise and it starts feeling incredibly costly and real.
The stakes get high.
Very high. The author notes that God does not form people merely so they can remain in a perpetual state of safe, cozy formation. He prepares them specifically in order to send them out into the friction of the real world.
The phrase the text uses here is deployment readiness. So what does that actually look like? Because, a lot of people feel, quote unquote, ready the moment they get an exciting idea.
And that is the exact danger the text addresses. Deployment readiness is emphatically not emotional excitement.
Say more about that.
Well, emotional excitement is cheap, right? It flares up really quickly, but it burns out just as fast when things get hard or boring. The text defines deployment readiness as what remains after your initial emotional excitement has been severely refined by the friction of obedience.
Wow. What remains after the excitement fades?
Exactly. Because a person might feel internally called to a task long before their character is actually robust enough to handle the crushing weight of it. Passion is a great starting point, sure, but passion has to be hammered into discipline on an anvil. Conviction has to mature into sheer, stubborn endurance.
It's that testing phase.
Yes. Again, look at the biblical pattern of architecture. Joseph had the visionary dream as a teenager, right? He was so excited he told his whole family.
Which didn't go well for him.
Not at all. He had to be broken and prepared in a literal dark prison before he was safely released into national administrative authority. Moses was shaped by 40 years of tedious obscurity, just watching sheep in a desert before he could face Pharaoh. Yeah. David was anointed king by a prophet, but then he spent years being hunted like an animal, trained in the obscurity of a shepherd's field and living in actual caves. The Apostle Paul spent years in hidden study and suffering before his wider, global apostolic ministry really unfolded.
So it's a very consistent pattern.
Incredibly consistent. Deployment readiness means you are no longer in training just for the sake of acquiring more knowledge or feeling good about yourself. You have been tested, you survived the fire, and you have finally become usable.
Okay, but how do you know when you have actually crossed that specific threshold? Let's say I'm a listener who has been working on a project or studying a field or just trying to lead my family well. I can imagine two very distinct, totally opposite dangers here.
Oh, for sure.
One danger is staying hidden forever out of paralyzing fear, right? You suffer from imposter syndrome and you constantly claim, I'm just not ready yet, I need another degree, I'm still preparing.
The perpetual student syndrome.
Exactly. But the other danger, which might actually be way more common today, is launching way too soon. Stepping out, starting the company, launching the ministry or whatever, before the concrete of your foundation has actually cured, and then you just collapse under the pressure of the spotlight.
Which we see happen all the time.
Constantly.
Right.
So what is the metric? How do we actually know when it is time to be released from the hidden phase?
This raises an important question, and it is a tension every leader faces. The text answers it by introducing the concept of a clarified calling.
A clarified calling.
Yeah, a clarified calling is one of the absolute clearest indicators that your internal readiness is finally transitioning into external release.
So how do you know it's clarified?
It is no longer just a vague, restless feeling or a sudden burst of weekend enthusiasm after you read a good book. It has become a deep, unshakable conviction that is anchored explicitly in God's Word. It has survived the boring, painfully hidden formation phase. And crucially, and this is the most important part, it is backed by tested character.
Tested character.
The text argues forcefully that character is the only currency that turns readiness into trustworthy release. Think about this. If you possess high-level skills, extreme intelligence, or immense charisma, but you lack tested character, your gifting is actually incredibly dangerous to yourself and to others.
Why is it dangerous? Break that down for the listener.
Because high competence without moral grounding almost inevitably leads to narcissism.
Oh, wow.
It does. If you are incredibly gifted, you will attract a crowd, you will generate revenue, and you will achieve visible success. People will flock to you. But without the deep-root system of humility and endurance, that success will corrupt you.
Because you start believing your own hype.
Exactly. You'll begin to view people as tools to be used rather than souls to be formed. You will build an echo chamber of yes men that insulates you from any real critique. Without endurance, your initial passion will inevitably metastasize into bitter burnout the very moment you face real opposition.
So the testing phase is a protection.
Yes. The testing phase, that hiding phase we talked about, is what burns off the ego, so that the gifting can be used safely without destroying the person wielding it.
The text has a fascinating line right around here. It says release is not abandonment, it is trust. It is the exact opposite of control.
Exactly. When you release something, whether that is a project you are handing over to a junior partner, a child you are finally sending off to college, or a ministry you are stepping down from, you are actively declaring that it is no longer held in fear.
You're letting go of the steering wheel.
Yeah. When you are truly deployment ready, you step into the mission recognizing that you are responsible for the faithful obedience, but the ultimate outcome belongs entirely to God. You completely release the exhausting fantasy of total control.
But carrying this kind of tested character, this really patient endurance into today's specific world is uniquely difficult. I mean, it feels like swimming against a literal tidal wave.
It's exhausting.
It is. It has honestly never been harder to be deployment ready in the slow, meticulous way this text describes, because the environment we are deploying into is just violently chaotic.
That is very true.
The text specifically addresses why this mission is under unprecedented pressure in our current cultural and technological moment.
Right. The author identifies that we are living in what they call a hinge moment in human history.
Yeah.
The sheer pace of cultural exchange, the exponential, terrifying acceleration of technology, and the massive expansion of the digital landscape have created an environment that is louder, faster, more fragmented, and wildly more distracting than almost any generation before us has ever had to face.
The text uses a phrase here that honestly gave me chills when I first read it. It diagnoses our modern condition by saying people today are informed, but not transformed.
Oof. That phrase perfectly encapsulates the great spiritual and intellectual paradox of our time.
It really does.
Think about the device in your pocket right now. We have access to abundant, limitless information, but we possess staggeringly rare wisdom. We have incredibly cheap visibility. Literally anyone can go viral for 15 seconds doing a dance, but we have a massive deficit of costly depth.
Everyone wants to be an influencer.
Everyone has a megaphone, everyone has a platform, everyone is constantly broadcasting an opinion, but almost no one has the relational equity to actually form another human soul.
Wow.
This digital access has inadvertently created a profound crisis of connection. People are technically more connected than at any point in human history, right? You can text someone in Tokyo in a second. Yet study after study shows they are lonelier, more anxious, and more isolated than ever.
It's an epidemic.
It is. They have access to thousands of disembodied voices on their feeds, but they lack actual flesh and blood mentors. They have an endless stream of content, but zero genuine community.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second because I know listeners in the tech space or digital marketing are thinking this exactly right now.
Bring it on.
If the ultimate goal is multiplication, which we established earlier is the core kingdom logic, aren't digital platforms the ultimate, undisputed form of multiplication?
It seems like it, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about the scale. I can tweet a theological idea or post a leadership video on YouTube and reach 2 million people instantly. I can stream a Sunday message to believers in underground churches on the other side of the globe. Isn't that the absolute apex of reproducing a mission? Why is the text so wary of this?
It's a very, very tempting thought, and it is the exact trap many modern organizations fall into. But the text offers a stern, explicit warning against confusing broadcasting with multiplying.
Okay, what's the difference?
The church, or any organization committed to true legacy, must not mistake digital tools for the actual hard work of discipleship. Yes, influence can go incredibly wide very quickly online, but human formation requires friction, and friction requires proximity.
Friction requires proximity. That's good.
Formational depth must go deep. Think about the limitations of the medium we're using right now. A podcast, even this deep dive, can teach you a new concept. It can transfer data to your brain. But a podcast cannot look you in the eye and correct you when you are acting out of selfish pride in your marriage.
Right. I can't see the listener. I can't hold them accountable.
Exactly. A live stream can inspire you to tears, but a live stream cannot show up at the hospital at 2 a.m. when your world is falling apart and sit in the waiting room with you. The live stream cannot replace the messy, inconvenient, beautiful friction of shared life. The text emphatically reminds us that discipleship is a transfer of life, not a transaction of data.
I absolutely love that. You cannot download character. You can't just put it on a flash drive and install it in someone's brain.
Precisely. To see how this is actually supposed to work, look at the Apostle Paul. Paul is responsible for writing a massive portion of the New Testament. He was a brilliant communicator. But he didn't just stay in a centralized, comfortable studio in Jerusalem, writing brilliant letters and dispatching them.
He didn't just hit send.
No, he physically traveled.
Oh, yeah.
He was shipwrecked. He wept with people. He aggressively exhorted them. He modeled behavior by working with his own hands as a tent maker so he wouldn't be a financial burden to the people he was serving.
He was in the trenches.
He suffered alongside the communities he was building. He didn't just offer content. He embodied credibility. He was intimately knowable and highly accountable to the people he led.
Which is so rare now.
In a digital age where absolutely anyone can rent a studio, buy some cool lighting, and project a flawless image of success, that kind of messy, embodied, tested credibility is exceedingly rare. And ironically, it is exactly what the exhausted, cynical modern world is actually starving for.
Which brings us to the core mechanical difference between how the modern world attempts to grow its platforms and how this text argues true, lasting legacy is actually built. It is the profound mathematical difference between addition and multiplication.
Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to understand that addition is not inherently bad. It is just severely limited by human physics.
What do you mean by human physics?
Well, addition says, I am highly capable. So I will do more work. I will add more tasks to my plate. I will gather more followers to myself. But you only have 24 hours in a day. You have a physical limit. Multiplication operates on a completely different premise.
Okay.
Multiplication says, I will intentionally slow down my own output so I can raise up others who can do likewise. Addition functions by gathering people to one centralized hub. Multiplication functions by sending equipped people out to create countless new autonomous centers.
I want to make this highly concrete for you listening. Let's use a culinary analogy.
Oh, I love a good food analogy.
You're right. Think about the difference between addition and multiplication, like the difference between two types of master chefs.
Okay.
The first chef is an absolute genius, but they refuse to share their secret recipes. They are terrified of losing their edge. Because they hold all the knowledge, you have to gather everyone to your one specific restaurant because it is literally the only place on earth they can get this amazing food.
That is addition. You are gathering people to you.
Exactly. Now, your restaurant might be incredibly successful. It might be packed every single night with a 6-month waiting list. But your impact is rigidly limited by the physical square footage of your dining room, the number of hours in a day, and your own inevitable physical exhaustion. If you want to feed more people, you just have to work harder and sleep less.
Which leads to burnout.
Every time. But the second chef operates on multiplication. This chef takes their precious core principles, the secret recipes, and they spend years painstakingly teaching 1,000 young, inexperienced cooks how to execute the cuisine.
They're giving away the secrets.
Yes. They empower those cooks to leave the master kitchen and open their own restaurants all over the world. You are no longer gathering, you are sending.
And that chef analogy brilliantly highlights the inherent danger of maintaining control. A mission that cannot function without that one master chef is structurally fragile. If the chef gets sick or goes on vacation or retires, the restaurant immediately closes. The magic is just gone.
The terminal vision again?
Exactly. The text points out a historical reality. Movements rooted in central control tend to plateau and ultimately shrink over time. But movements rooted in radical multiplication, giving away the recipe, expand far beyond the geographic or chronological imagination of their original founders.
Can you give a historical example of that?
Look at the early Christian church. It was a dynamic, decentralized movement, not a static monument. There was no massive central headquarters in Jerusalem, micromanaging every single decision across the Roman Empire.
No corporate board.
Right. When persecution hit Jerusalem, Antioch quickly became a new sending base. The goal of the early apostles wasn't to force local churches in Asia Minor to be exact cultural clones of the Jerusalem church. The goal was to reproduce the core life and DNA of the gospel and allow it to be contextualized and expressed organically within the local soil.
The text uses the metaphor of fire to explain this, right?
Yes, and it's such a powerful image. The kingdom vision is not to build one massive, blindingly bright spotlight in the center of the city, forcing everyone to walk toward it just to see the light.
Which is how we usually build things.
Right. Instead, the vision is a single flame that is used to light another candle, which then lights another and another. And the beautiful physics of fire is that the original flame does not diminish its own heat or light when it ignites the next candle. It simply creates more light, igniting autonomous centers everywhere.
That is an incredibly inspiring image. But let's be painfully honest for a second.
Sure.
Becoming a catalyst rather than a centralized star, it sounds deeply beautiful in theory. But the text is surprisingly, almost brutally realistic about the toll this actually takes on a human being.
It is not easy.
No. Willingly stepping out of the spotlight, dedicating yourself to the hidden, unglamorous work of generational architecture, relinquishing your control to messy apprentices so they can multiply. This is not a frictionless romantic process. It hurts.
It is incredibly painful.
And the text outlines 4 very specific, inevitable challenges that arise when this noble vision collides with harsh reality.
And the author makes it clear that these challenges are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They're unavoidable symptoms that you are actually doing something right. You will face them.
What are they?
They are resistance, isolation, fatigue, and uncertainty. Let's break them down, because how a leader chooses to navigate these 4 pressures absolutely determines whether their mission survives or fractures.
Okay, let's start with resistance.
Resistance comes in 2 forms, external and internal. External resistance is the pushback from the culture, the market, or institutional systems that do not understand or value the slow work of multiplication. They want fast metrics. They want the shiny glass tower now.
They want the quarterly report to look good.
Exactly. But internal resistance is often worse. It is your own fear, your nagging doubt, and your deep-seated insecurity screaming at you to take the control back.
Next is isolation. And this isn't just about being physically alone, is it?
No, it's deeper than that.
It hits you when you suddenly realize that very few people around you actually understand the psychological weight of your calling. You are making decisions for a horizon 30 years out, while everyone else is demanding solutions for tomorrow. Leadership, especially transitional leadership, is inherently a really lonely endeavor.
Exactly. And that loneliness feeds directly into the 3rd challenge. Fatigue. We aren't just talking about needing a good night's sleep or a weekend off at the beach. The text is describing deep, emotional, spiritual, and relational depletion.
Soul fatigue.
Yes. When you are constantly pouring yourself out to form other people, when you are absorbing their failures and frustrations, it drains your marrow.
And finally, the most maddening challenge of all, uncertainty.
Oh, this one is tough.
The sheer agony of faithfully doing the right things, diligently sowing the seeds in the dark, doing the hidden architecture, and seeing absolutely zero visible fruit for long, excruciating periods of time. The text notes that all 4 of these intense challenges inevitably tempt us toward one very specific, very destructive coping mechanism.
And that is striving.
Striving. Which usually in our culture is praised. Like, if I'm striving for excellence at my job, I get a positive performance review. But how is the text defining striving here? It sounds like they mean trying harder, forcing the issue, white-knuckling your way to an outcome.
Yes, the text uses striving to describe a state of spiritual panic.
Spiritual panic.
It is forcing outcomes, manipulating people, hyper-managing processes, and burning yourself out, trying to manufacture the growth that only God can provide. Striving is a trauma response to losing control.
Wow.
But striving is absolutely not the solution. The text offers a counter antidote: alignment over striving.
Alignment.
Alignment means intentionally anchoring your soul deeper in God's stated mission rather than your own frantic expectations. It means establishing actual physical rhythms of grace. Look at the life of Jesus again as the ultimate model. He was completely aligned, which meant he never strove.
Give an example of that.
Well, he didn't heal every single sick person in every single town he visited. Let that sink in.
That's a hard pill to swallow.
It is. He willingly walked away from pressing, legitimate needs to withdraw to solitary places to pray. He literally fell asleep on a boat in the middle of a life-threatening storm.
While his disciples were panicking.
Right. Because he moved entirely on God's timing, not in reaction to the crowd's frantic demands. He knew his limitations as an incarnate human, and he respected them.
So what does this all mean for the listener grappling with the challenge of uncertainty? If you are listening to this right now and you feel like you have been doing the hard, hidden work, you are intentionally relinquishing control at the office. You are trying to be a father or a mother to your team rather than a dictatorial founder.
You're trying to do it right.
You are pouring into your kids, but you look around and you see absolutely zero progress. In fact, things might look messier than when you started. How does the text say we should measure progress when we're doing the right things but seeing no visible fruit? How do we survive the uncertainty without reverting back to striving?
The text points to a total, radical shift in how we calculate metrics. You have to actively divorce yourself from measuring visible results and pivot entirely to measuring faithful obedience.
It's changing the scorecard.
Entirely. The text quotes a brilliant, obscure little parable from Jesus found in Mark chapter 4. He says the kingdom is like a man who scatters seed on the ground. He sleeps and rises night and day, and the seed sprouts and grows. He knows not how.
He knows not how.
The farmer does not understand the miraculous biochemistry of germination. The profound growth is happening entirely beneath the surface, in the absolute dark, where the farmer cannot see it, measure it, or force it to go faster.
He just has to wait.
Yes. Your confidence, therefore, cannot be rooted in your own ability to produce immediate, verifiable results. Your confidence must rest entirely in God's faithful ability to bring the growth in His appointed time.
That is so freeing.
It is. When you fully embrace alignment over striving, it transforms how you move through those 4 challenges. Resistance refines your character instead of destroying your resolve. Isolation pushes you into deeper, richer solitude with God. Fatigue forces you to adopt sustainable, healthy rhythms of rest. And uncertainty radically deepens your trust.
Okay, this is all incredibly profound. We've deconstructed the false metrics, but I want to get incredibly practical as we land this plane.
Let's do it.
For you, listening right now, how do you take these massive theological realities, this generational architecture, this multiplication logic, and turn them into a concrete movement in your own specific life? How do you actually do this on Monday morning?
Right, because vision without execution is just hallucination.
Exactly. The altar doesn't just leave us with theory. The text provides a very specific 5-step blueprint to move from internal conviction to external multiplying impact.
Because vision without actual physical embodiment is just daydreaming. It is incomplete. The text gives us 5 highly practical steps to turn this philosophy into reality.
Okay, what's step 1?
Step 1 is foundational. Clarify and document your calling. The author insists you must physically write it down.
Why write it down?
Because writing forces precision. When thoughts remain just swirling in your head, they are nebulous and undefined. Writing exposes your vague assumptions. It forces you to articulate exactly what you believe you are called to do and precisely who you are called to serve. Until it is on paper, it is not a plan. It is just a feeling.
And once you have that clarity, step 2 is to establish a reproducible discipleship system.
Right. Remember the chef analogy. If your mission or your business relies entirely on your unique charisma, your specific tone of voice, or your unwritten intuition, it physically cannot multiply. You need to distill your process into a system that is simple, clear, and highly adaptable.
It has to be transferable.
Exactly. It shouldn't be a complex, bureaucratic web of red tape that only you possess the intellectual capital to untangle. The text suggests defining a clear, staged pathway for the people you are leading. For example, explicitly mapping out how to move someone from basic introductory concepts to deeper character formation, to taking on leadership responsibilities, and finally, to sending them out to start their own initiative.
I look at this like open source software.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
If you are building a legacy, you aren't trying to build a closed, highly proprietary app like iOS that only runs on your specific hardware under your specific thumbprint. You are trying to write clean, simple, robust, open source code.
Right.
You want code that anyone in the world can download, easily understand, and then actively modify and use to build something incredible in their own local environment. If the system is too complicated, people will just default back to asking you to do it for them.
That is a brilliant translation of the concept. And that leads perfectly into step 3. Invest in indigenous leadership.
Indigenous leader.
In a corporate or ministry setting, this means building leaders within the community, not constantly doing the work for them. This is a massive trap for highly competent people. When you do things for people because it is faster and you can do it better, you're quietly creating a toxic cycle of dependency.
Because it's easier to just do it yourself.
It is, but they learn to rely on your rescue, empowering them, which means allowing them to do it imperfectly and learn from the failure, creates long-term sustainability. The text gives a highly specific action item here. Identify 2 or 3 specific individuals in your sphere of influence right now and invest deeply in them over the next 12 months with the explicit, stated goal of transferring a piece of your leadership to them.
Not 100 people, 2 or 3. That requires serious focus.
It does.
Step 4 is strengthening your support ecosystem. The text makes it clear that you cannot be a solo operative. The lone wolf myth is deadly here. You need active prayer support. You need safe relational support where you can confess your struggles. You need strategic partners who can spot your blind spots. And you need adequate resources. If you try to carry the weight of multiplication alone, the fatigue will absolutely crush you.
And finally, step 5. Commit to lifelong formation. This is the ultimate safety net for your legacy.
Lifelong formation.
The fundamental rule of spiritual gravity is that your public effectiveness will never, ever safely outgrow your private character. The exact moment your public output, your speaking, your leading, your producing, begins to significantly outpace your private devotion and character formation, your sustainability is severely threatened.
You are building a skyscraper on wet concrete.
Exactly. You must establish rigorous, non-negotiable personal rhythms of silence, reflection, continuous learning, and spiritual growth. You have to feed the root system, or the tree will die from the inside out.
So we have covered a truly massive amount of ground today. We've moved from exposing the world's broken terminal metrics of success, this desperate obsession with building temporary sandcastles and demanding immediate applause.
Right?
We looked at the subtle spiritual danger of the human ego and the absolute trap of trying to make yourself indispensable to your own mission. We uncovered the vital necessity of generational architecture, doing the hidden, messy rebar and concrete work of quiet obedience that no one applauds.
The underground work.
Yeah. We discussed the mechanical differences between the exhaustion of addition and the exponential power of multiplication, and we just walked through the practical 5-step blueprint for systematically releasing your calling into the capable hands of others.
And after laying all of this out, the text culminates in a final, urgent plea to the reader. It directly challenges you to move beyond simply nodding along in intellectual agreement.
Because that's easy to do.
It is. The author warns that passive agreement with a beautiful idea is actually a subtle form of disobedience. You can sit here and admire this agricultural vision of seeds and multiplication all day long. You can think it sounds wonderfully profound.
Right.
But if you do not actively change how you operate, if you don't step off the track, hand over the baton, and start investing in those 2 or 3 people, your intellectual agreement means absolutely nothing. You must be willing to actually say yes and step into the painful, glorious pattern of being sent and sending others.
It takes action.
Because the truest, most accurate legacy is not the glowing eulogy that is said about you when you are gone. It is the living, breathing human beings who continue to multiply the work precisely because you empower them to do so.
It all comes down to what you actually leave behind when you finally exit the room.
It does. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought inspired by a very specific, almost haunting word used near the very end of the source text.
Residue.
Residue. The text asks a piercing question. What kind of residue will your life leave? So I want you to ask yourself this today. If your current life's work, your specific role at your company, your family structure, or your community project were suddenly and permanently taken entirely out of your hands tomorrow morning,
Hmm.
what exact residue would remain?
That is a tough question.
Would the people you leave behind possess the internal DNA, the tested character, and the structural empowerment to seamlessly rebuild it and carry the mission forward without missing a beat? Or would that entire organization simply collapse and become a silent, decaying monument to the fact that you were once there? Don't spend your life building a monument. Plant a seed.